30,000 United Nations troops entered the mountains around the Chosin Reservoir in November 1950. Nearly 8 times that many Chinese soldiers were already waiting to close the trap around them. This was the opening move of China's second offensive, and it very nearly worked. The odds facing the 1st Marine Division and the army units beside it were roughly 8 attackers for every defender, in terrain built for ambush. Over the next 17 days, through one of the coldest winters on record, those trapped troops would fight their way 78 miles back to the sea. The reservoir itself was no wilderness backwater, it was a man-made lake feeding hydroelectric power to North Korea's mining industry, wedged into terrain with almost no roads. By late November, Marines were stretched along a single route from Hagaru-ri in the south to Yudam-ni in the northwest corner. X-Corps around them combined the U.S. Army's 3rd and 7th Infantry Divisions, the 1st Marine Division, and British Royal Marines. None of them yet knew Chinese forces had already slipped around the lake to close the road behind them. The Chinese didn't attack in silence. Every major night assault opened with the same eerie ritual: bugles blaring, whistles shrieking, cymbals clashing across the dark ridgelines, a deliberate psychological weapon meant to disorient defenders before the first soldier appeared. At Yudam-ni, tens of thousands of disciplined Chinese troops came in wave after wave through the freezing dark. The Marines and soldiers holding the perimeter had never faced an enemy attacking quite like this, in these numbers, in this cold. Cold was its own enemy, and it fought for the Chinese. Mortar base plates cracked corner to corner or shattered outright in the extreme temperatures. Elevating screws worked loose overnight and eroded fast once they did. Firing pins snapped so often that ordnance crews stopped waiting for replacements and started forging new ones by hand, right there in the field. The heavier 4.2-inch mortars held up better than the lighter models, small mercies in weather this brutal. By the time Major General O.P. Smith understood the full picture at his command post in Hagaru-ri, the 1st Marine Division and the 31st Regimental Combat Team were surrounded and badly outnumbered, edging toward annihilation. Casualties were mounting on every perimeter. Smith had commanded through hard decisions before, but this one was different. There was no reinforcement coming, and the only road out ran straight through the enemy holding the high ground above it. The bugles came again the next night, and the night after that. Each assault built on the last, more coordinated, closer to breaking through. Chinese troops kept coming in numbers that should have overwhelmed the defenders outright. They didn't. Every ridge held, if barely, and every hour the perimeter survived bought time for what Smith was already planning, not a stand to the last man, but a way out. Smith made his decision. There would be no last stand at Hagaru-ri. The division would fight its way out as a single, intact force, wounded and equipment included, down the only road available, 78 miles of ice and mountain pass to the port of Hungnam. It was not a plan built on speed. It was built on refusing to leave anyone, or anything, behind. The 78 miles ahead ran through some of the coldest weather Korea had recorded, temperatures well below zero, wind cutting through every layer the men had. Thousands of Korean refugees joined the column, fleeing the same advance the Marines were fighting through. Trucks carried what wounded they could. Everyone else walked, one icy switchback at a time, never far from the ridgelines where Chinese units still watched the road. Chinese units struck the column again as it wound through Funchilin Pass, the bugles and whistles rolling down off the ridgeline exactly as they had at Yudam-ni and Hagaru-ri. This time the Marines couldn't dig in and hold, they had to keep the column moving while fighting off an enemy still occupying the high ground above the only road they had. Every mile forward was won twice, once against the terrain, once against the Chinese watching it. Overhead, Navy and Marine aviators flew constantly through the same brutal weather, hammering Chinese positions along the ridgelines to keep the column moving. Offshore, the 7th Fleet stood by with fire support and logistics the retreat depended on. None of it was glamorous work, it was cold, exhausting, and relentless, but without air cover over that road, the numbers on the ground didn't work out in the Marines' favor. 13 days after Hagaru-ri, the column reached Hungnam and the sea. Ships waited to carry the 1st Marine Division, the army units beside them, and tens of thousands of Korean refugees south to safety. The 17-day campaign was over. China had forced X-Corps out of North Korea entirely, a real strategic win. But the force they'd set out to destroy walked onto those ships still intact, still armed, and still a fighting division. General Smith himself never called it a retreat. Asked about the breakout, he said simply that his division wasn't falling back, it was attacking in another direction. The record backs the defiance. China won the campaign, the United Nations lost North Korea. But the 1st Marine Division survived intact as a fighting force, and by one account the campaign ruined the Chinese army in the process, proof, for the first time in this war, that Chinese forces could be beaten in open combat.